Welcome, Michael. Let's first make some introduction to our mystery guest for tonight. It's Mikael Storsjö. I hope I'm pronouncing your name in the right way. So my name is Ruud Meij, by the way, and for tonight I invited one of my a friend of mine who I worked a lot with in Lviv. He's called Volodymyr Beglov. He was a former president of the Education Center for Human Rights in Lviv, and is now working as director of the American House in Lviv. But unfortunately, about 1.5 hour ago, he called me and he said, well, probably I have COVID, so I'm ill. So, and what are good friends for? So I immediately started connecting with some good friends of mine, and one of the good friends of mine in Lviv is Natalia van Duven. And Natalia said, well, you should invite Mikael Storsjö. So we just met just a couple of minutes ago for the first time, Michael. So you say you were from Finland. We hardly had any time to prepare for what we are going to talk, but we just we exchanged some words and we think, okay, this is going to work. So welcome and great. I immensely appreciate that you're doing this now on such a short notice, Michael.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much. So could you introduce yourself a bit?
Yes, let's take a short version. Well, I'm actually just now living in Lviv, and I'm not in Finland. I live in Helsinki, Finland. And I know very well this Natalia that you told, and as her guest here in Lviv just now. But we have had, of course, very much discussions with Natalia around topics of common interest, so to say, and we have both long experience of politics of that kind that has caused the situation that is in Ukraine just now. Myself, I have been active in different human rights organizations, Amnesty among others, and some 10 years ago we founded a society, Finros Forum, that was a civic society that connected Russian citizens and the Finnish citizens. We had a lot of very big these conferences in Helsinki, invited many of those well-known human rights defenders in Russia. And as I told you a moment ago, many of our guests are not with us anymore. They have got killed. And one supporter of our activity was Anna Politkovskaya, and she's dead. And one guest we had 2 or 3 times was Nemtsov. He is killed. And then we had a lot of working together with the Soldiers' Mothers organizations, and then civic organizations all around Russia, very much from Caucasus. And there has been a big death toll about our friends there, and that has somehow been defining also our work and giving more energy to continue when we see what can happen when there is not freedom and democracy. And it has motivated, even if it's very, very sad things that have happened, of course.
Perfectly. Yeah.
But one of my own activities was a long time ago that I got involved in this what happened in Chechnya, and I was rather active in these things. And after the war in 2008, 9, 10, I helped. There was a lot of Chechens that were refugees without having refugee status in Georgia and in Turkey, and I helped them to come to Finland. And maybe I have a small tendency to do things a little bit too far. So I got a little bit legal problems. Then got a little bit more than 100 Chechens to Finland, and all of them got this so-called international protection, so it was a successful operation as such. But what I would say, what is now in relating to this situation in Ukraine, our president, who is a rather good guy, he said when 24th of February, when Russia started the attack towards Ukraine, he said that now the masks are away and we can see just the cold faces of war. And that is true, of course, but on the other hand, the situation is not new. The whole organization that we had, we warned for this, and it's not nice to remind people, what did I say, but we said a long time ago, we saw what Putin was, because the Putin who is doing what he's doing in Ukraine today is exactly the same Putin who started that war against Chechnya and killed tens of thousands of people just in order to win the political goal that he had. He showed what human rights are for him and how important it is to win and to oppress opponents and things like that. And when we have followed what Putin have done after that, I happened to be in August 2008 in Georgia. And I was in Gori when the Russian tanks came in there. I happened to be there. I had planned to go, due to my interest in Caucasus, I had fixed a visa to Abkhazia. And then the war started, but I didn't let it change my plans. Yes, the visa to Abkhazia is, by the way, a little bit the special visa. It's normally visa is allowance to get to a country, but the Abkhazian visa that they give you by email, it's actually you can enter the country very, very well, but the visa gives you a right to exit the country. It's a little bit opposite. No, yes, what I was saying just about this thing, which is essential, that it's not so that Putin's mask fall down and we could see the person behind that mask, because we saw that face already in 1999 in Chechnya, Grozny. We saw it 2008 in Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. We have seen it in Transnistria. We have seen it in Nagorno-Karabakh. So, and I spoke about this Finros forum that we had. Now it has been much talk about this Nord Stream 2, but already when Nord Stream 1, the first Nord Stream was planned, we had a big conference that we had the pleasure to keep it in the Finnish Parliament building, and then we took up all those things that was involved. Why do they do it like this? It was at that time they had stopped a couple of times the gas stream to Ukraine. It was clearly that it was a question about pressuring Ukraine, and at the same time to make Europe dependent upon this energy from Russia. And at that time, the Finnish authorities said that it's just an ecological issue to let them go through Finnish waters, this tube. In Germany, they said it's pure economic thing. It has nothing to do with politics and so on. But everybody should have known with whom they were doing business. And what is so sad when you look at Ukraine today is that we, the free world, we had accepted step by step these actions of Putin, and now we are in that position that he is attacking a country of 45 million people and bombing their very old, nice, beautiful capital city. And all this is just a consequence, in my view, from that it wasn't stopped earlier. It should have been stopped. There were sanctions when he put Grozny down to earth, but those sanctions were over after half a year, and then it was business as usual. And then if you think about the 2014, when he, for the first time after Second World War, took over and changed by force the borders between countries. It was very noise sanctions, but they didn't were not strong enough because it was like an invitation for Putin. Go forward, you are successful, you can do this. Europe is keeping some noise, but very soon they want to go back to business with you. And this is the big mistake. And now, as I can see it, the Ukrainians are paying with their lives because of this naivety that we have had. Normal people in the free world in Western Europe, and that is so sad that those people, just because of bad judgment by our politicians, big amounts of people are dying. They will die, many people tonight also, because of these bad historical judgments. And this is the tragedy of this thing. It could have been prevented, but we didn't do anything to prevent it. So we are somehow, in the Western world, we are guilty to a big extent to what is happening here now today.
I'll come back to that in a minute. So somehow you seem to be always on the right place. If you look a bit like your life history, being in Chechnya and so on, and now being in Lviv. You have, let's say, a nose for that.
But it has well, might be also that some peculiar interest to see how the world looks when it looks ugly.
Yes, well, it looks ugly. Yes, yeah. And you could say that even if you look at this history of Ukraine in the past 100 years, so that this is already a terrible history. So it would start in 21. And then Stalin came, then Hitler came, especially also in Lviv, where you are now. And then Stalin came again, then Khrushchev came, then Brezhnev came, and now Putin comes. So
yes,
that's...
We are actually writing one article together with Natalia now, and I hope to get it published in this Kiev Independent. And the interesting thing here is this thing that there are three persons as human rights abusers, people killing both own citizens and the foreign citizens, starting wars, three persons above all other. It's Hitler, Stalin, and Putin. And the interesting thing is that all of these people have done their worst things towards the Ukrainian people.
Yes.
And if you look at Stalin, he had this Holodomor, killed nobody knows how many, but maybe 8 million people, and depending how you calculate it. And then when he killed his opponents, there were a lot of Ukrainians died, killed, 37 till 39. He did his biggest crimes in Ukraine, but also Hitler did it to that extent that Germany has had as a principle some guilt from the Second World War, and that's why they have been soft towards the Soviet Union, towards Russia. But actually, Ukraine suffered much more than Russia in the Second World War. Of the 4 million people that were sent as workers to Germany, the majority was Ukrainians, and it was a one-way ticket because they worked till they died. And there died more Ukrainians than it died Russians in the war. It had to do with this killing the Jews here and things like that. So it's one can ask yourself what wrong has the Ukrainian people done when they have this karma, that always when there is a despot on the European scene, he will do his worst things towards the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, that's indeed a terrible part of history. If you and it has also this same narrative, declaring Ukraine not as an independent nation and declaring Ukrainians not as let's say, as full-fledged people, so to say. I was in Odessa, and we took a tour in Odessa, and and then there is a memorial, and in this memorial was about a church, and it was in a church where especially Jews were basically assembled, and the church was basically simply put at fire with the people in there. So, and this was a kind of brutality, so to say, what Hitler didn't even consider in Western Europe. So there is in this narrative something like you are not full-fledged people with not full-fledged human rights, so to say. And so basically we can do with you what you want. Okay, so that's this terrible history of Ukraine and Ukrainians, so to say. There is you don't have, there's no any reluctance, so to say, to be cruel. And you see that with Putin. You see it in this about how it's happening in Mariupol. You can see this the same. It's like extinguishing a city, so to say, and extinguishing. And you have seen that in Chechnya, and you have seen this, and we have seen this in Aleppo, and so on. It's all.
It's somehow maybe he did some mistakes now with this attack towards Ukraine, and one thing was that he thought that Europe will just keep some noise and then continue business as usual. But maybe it is that this time the happenings, Aleppo, it's Arabs. They are used to get killed in wars, and Chechnya, Grozny, Muslims far away. It doesn't matter so much. But now it's the capital in the heart of Europe, and that made the Europeans to wake up. And also, for example, people, if you look at Putin's demands that the NATO shall not have the right to go to the east, now there are just two countries that have border to Russia and who are not members of NATO. It's Ukraine and Finland. And in Finland, the same argumentation he had towards this. When restoring the Russian Empire, he could use the same rhetoric also with Finland. Of course, we don't think that he would do it, but the whole world didn't think that he would do what he did in Ukraine. So we have to take it also in Finland as a risk. And now our politicians have woke up and are now going in these days to ask for joining NATO, because actually the only thing that stops Putin is the 5th article, seems to be.
It seems to be. That's something we have to consider. So you said something interesting that a couple of minutes ago, that you said we actually have a kind of, we are actually guilty of something what's happening now in Ukraine. And so basically we are talking about Western European, but also United States and so on. We have, especially Europe, as a kind of guilt towards Ukrainians. So could you explain on that, what you mean by that?
Well, we knew already from when the Nord Stream gas tube was coming to Europe. It was actually America warned at that time already, and Ronald Reagan already warned that don't get dependent on the energy from one source and things like that. But this Nord Stream tube, there was capacity enough with the tubes going from Russia over to Europe. But the problem was that they went through Ukraine and through the Baltic states also, some of these tubes. And he wanted to make Europe more than before dependent on Russian energy, and to avoid that it goes through these countries that he had in his plans already that he will attack one day. And we should have seen that thing very clearly and not accepted it. But for Germany, it was just this business or not. Let's say so that the guy who as this last thing when he was Prime Minister, Chancellor in Germany, Schröder, it was this decision about Nord Stream, and afterwards he has become a prominent guy with a very big salary from Russian state-owned Gazprom and Gasnet, what is from two companies taking $1 million around 1 million salary a year for his work to them, and he has not even today stepped back. And of course, we can a little bit think about is this corruption when it's really ugly corruption that he has got paid afterwards, but got paid actually well over 10 million euros for his work for Russia's interest. But what we should have seen in Europe at that time was that it was not acceptable, this thing, to put in danger a country like Ukraine, when the whole sole purpose of this tube was that it shouldn't go through Ukraine. And to that extent, to accept it and look at it as business as usual. Now we are paying, and especially Europe are paying in euros, but Ukrainians are paying in lives for this miscalculation that was not based upon that they wouldn't have known what is going on, but just hoping that it will go good somehow, and take the risk that is involved in such a thing. And to that extent, that is one thing. But then also when we look at what happened in Grozny, what happened in Georgia when he attacked a country without any risk, it was not Georgia who attacked Russia. And when we look at what he did in Crimea 2014, all these things have been question about using brutal force to enter the territory of free countries, to bend them under his own will. And if you think about this Crimea thing, the sanctions that were done and so on, they were, like the Russians used to say, they laughed to the sanctions. It was no actions actually at all. And for Putin, it was business as usual. And that was, in my view, just like an ordering of a new conflict soon. And it is that what we see today, because giving up essential human rights interests, essential international law regulations, just for the business to go on as usual. It is totally clear that those that did these decisions, they have responsibility for what has happened today. And now in Europe, it seems that Europe has somehow admitted it. I mean, what German has changed their foreign policy is a sign that they realize that they have done so wrong so far, that now they are in the common fight for freedom for Ukraine also.
Would you say this? Very well remember 2014. 2014 was 13-14. That was the Maidan. That was basically about the association agreement with the European Union then. And couldn't you say that? Well, this was the first, and even before that, the opportunity. And so Ukrainians and Ukraine has always been very clear. We want to take the European way, as they told it. So we don't want to go in this Russia side, the Russian movement. Now I want to take the European way. Actually, at Maidan there was as much European flags as Ukrainian flags when you see them. And time and again. So basically, we refused to acknowledge that. That's to say, to acknowledge. Okay, you're welcome. Even in my country, of course, in the Netherlands, we had this terrible Ukraine association referendum, which still, I think, is staying on our country, so to say, that we basically are refused even the association agreement. So this is one of the opportunities we actually had to make Ukraine, to help Ukraine to be part of the European Union, European community, to make it part of the political structure of Europe, and the same we could have done with NATO before.
Yes, but there is, of course, this difference between NATO and European Union. Putin used it as a pretext that is NATO interests here and so on. But of course, we all know that Putin not for 1 second has been afraid that the NATO will invade Russia, that they have security interests, that the NATO will come over the border. What he's afraid of is only this thing that he cannot attack a NATO country because the 5th article will put an economy that is 20 times bigger than his economy as his enemy. And that war can end in many, very many different ways. But what Putin, now our president talked with Putin a couple of days ago, and he had then 4 claims now that he wants, he has went down from this, that he doesn't demand Zelensky to step down and these things. But there are 2 of these was that Ukraine should not join NATO and not join European Union. It was except one of these 4 things. It was not to join the European Union. And I think that that Putin is not, he does not fear NATO as such, that if even Ukraine would become member sometimes in future, in that it's not a danger for him. But he is afraid about European Union, because if and when Ukraine becomes a member of European Union, they will see the same thing that they have seen in Poland. And just remember this thing that 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and at that time they had basically the same gross national product, Poland and Ukraine. Today it's close to 4 times higher in Poland. And what he is afraid is that this free trade and that this free trade and this development of a society based upon rule of law, where it creates economy, it creates wealth. And what he is afraid of is this thing that if Ukraine would join a European Union and become a welfare country within a decade or 2, then it would be so harsh. It would be like we have said in Finland, that it is the sharpest border between 2 countries is from Finland. When you take a car ride from Finland over to Russia, when the poverty, the mentality, this political freedom, everything changes so radically. And to have a Slavonic people that big as Ukraine, it would very easily then get the idea among people in Petersburg and Moscow that, hey, we want to save. And it is this that he didn't want to happen. And then, of course, this thing for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union has been a little bit, they have these problems with corruption. They have also had these oligarch problems, very much Russian oligarchs as such, and these things. So that has been a little bit a hinder on the way, because there have been good development in Ukraine regarding this rule of law, but they are not where they should be, maybe yet. But now it is, of course, so this EU is the main thing, I think, for Putin, what he is afraid about, because he don't want to have a show window about how a democratic society can be happy and prosperous. He don't want to have it at the border to Russia with a brother people.
Yeah, what's basically an interesting question. As you probably know, we are involved very much in this anti-corruption and integrity in Ukraine, my colleagues and myself, and especially in Lviv, because Lviv is the only city in Ukraine what actually has a municipal bureau of anti-corruption and integrity, so to say. So we are building there for 10 years, and this is basically the idea that you. Well, we had the idea, and some of you who were basically listening had this idea that while we were coming to Ukraine about I think 2007 for the first time, and people asked us, why do you come here in Ukraine? Our answer was very plain and say, yeah, well, where Ukraine goes, Russia goes in time. So if we succeed in creating Ukrainian prosperous, non-corrupt, democratic nation, that would be very attractive for Russians to ask for the same and to fight for the same, because we didn't have this glass bowl, which you can see, okay, but it will be a terrible war. But basically, this is actually something you are explaining. Like people in Moscow will ask, well, this is a good alternative. The basic question of, or one of the basic, and it's more a bit of an open door question. So why would Putin there be afraid of that? Because if you could have a prosperous Russian Federation, what's wrong with that? So why are you afraid of them if you were Putin?
Well, there is, I mean, look at the democracies in West Europe. If there is a real democracy, there is also a fight against corruption. Corruption is not accepted. Autocracy is not a part of that model, and he is mostly interested in that he and the Russian elite shall have it nice. And they don't actually like Russia themselves so very much either. That's why they buy their properties in France, in UK, all over Europe. They put their children in schools in Europe. They have their mansions there. Their wives are very often living full-time.
His daughter is living here in the Netherlands.
Yes, exactly. And Lavrov's daughter, or stepdaughter, she's 26 years old. She bought it, was it 3-4 years ago, 22, 23 years old. She bought an apartment in London for £5 million. So she must have been a very successful businesswoman or something like that, because the salary that Lavrov gets himself would never have given the possibility for his daughter to buy something like that. But of course, you know, Lavrov is corrupted also. He has a lot of millions and things like that. And they like this thing. But they also know that the life is better in Europe, in whatever European country, actually. That's why they put their families there, their daughters there, and they want a good life for their families. But they don't want to give that good life to their fellow Russians. That is because then in a democratic system, it would not be possible for people to steal from the state budget, things like that. It's impossible that in democracy you have a transparency. People would see what happens, and in the next elections there would be a change, and so on. So yes, what can I say more than I agree?
No, it's true. Right? So, but basically, I think so. Well, if you think a bit out loud, in the 20th century, you could see that well, in the former Soviet Union, there was some kind of, let's say, maybe perverted, but an ideal. So if you look at this communism, especially in its early stages, that was an idea: we create a better world. So to say, a world of more equality and so on, no ownership, no private ownership, you know, end of class struggle. And what is left for this now is only a cynical self-enrichment, so to say, of an oligarchy. So this
yes, but also in political views, it's a little bit interesting to look at the Politburo, which was the highest decision-making bureau there in the Soviet Union. There were a lot of members from these different countries there. But what happened when and they were then believing in the communism and the ideals of communism and so on. But when Soviet Union collapsed, you see it very well in countries like Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, other also. It's the members of the Politburo, the communistic Politburo, that then became these autocratic leaders of their own countries. It was a very short step for them from believing in Marx and Lenin's ideals and then to become.
It's basically this. Maybe this is this unmasking. Tear up.
Yeah,
the mask.
it's unmasking,
very...
but it's so totally clear that it is ideologically very defined Politburo, that it showed up that actually nobody in the Politburo believed for 1 cent in communism. They believed in something totally different things, and that is maybe one reason why Soviet Union also collapsed. That if the leadership don't believe in the state you are running, then it's a very bad sign for the future.
Yeah. Okay. So just for people who entered, just entered this conversation, I'm not talking with Volodymyr Beglov. Maybe you would have expected. He is ill, unfortunately, but I'm very happy that Mikael Storsjö from Finland is now a part of our conversation. So just if you thought, well, who is that? We should be talking to someone else. You know, this is Mikael we are talking about. Let's change the subject a bit to this human rights. This was we had this idea of talking about human rights in times of war, so to say. And if you think about human rights in times of war, then human rights are most of the time the first casualty, so to say. And if you look at the Mariupol and you think about human rights, well, I was always very much and still are a fan of Hannah Arendt, one of our greatest philosophers of the 20th century. She said, well, I don't give a shit about human rights. I want civic rights, and I want someone who protects these. If you are in need of human rights, you're most of the time stateless. There's no one to protect you. There's no government. There's no international government. So human rights, Hannah Arendt was very suspicious about this, so to say. And well, I'm not totally agreeing with her, but I understand what he means. So what could be is there any substantial meaning nowadays? So when Ukraine is at war and we are all supporting Ukraine in the idea of human rights. You've been also a human rights activist, as I know. So what would you say about that?
Well, to some extent, I read in the news feed a moment ago that Human Rights Watch, a very respected human rights organization, have criticized Ukraine for this thing that they are showing these captured enemy soldiers and put it out on the internet. And that is, of course, it is against. It is apparently in conflict with something that some Geneva Convention says about these things. But it is a minor thing, I would say. I don't believe that there is any torture or any humiliating as such. I can see that the reason why they are doing it. Well, I'm partial. I'm not impartial in this conflict, but I can see that the one reason that they do it is that it is this information in Russia is very restricted. Mothers don't know where their sons are and things like that, and to some extent this is directed to the Russian public that your sons are now in war, but these are in safe. They are in captivity. They are safe. They will come home. So it is like a good message to their families when they are showing up these people also. But of course there are this, in the war there's also always propaganda and things like that. Yeah. But if you think about in this war now and the human rights, one remarkable thing happened yesterday, or was it the day before yesterday, when Russia was excluded from, or they were 1 hour before and asked for getting out from the Council of Europe. And what is actually a question about is the European Declaration of Human Rights and the Human Rights Court in Hague, that Strasbourg, and so they took the step and were forced, and they self-took the step. And for the human rights in Russia, this is not a very good thing, of course, because it has been the last resort for very many people. it's a very big amount of the cases in Strasbourg have been with Russian cases, because there have been so grave human rights violence against those human rights, and they have got a lot of these sentences. And it's a little pity, this thing, that, for example, there are several hundreds of Chechens that have got right through this court. There are very many Russians all over the country that have got it. And it is somehow a declaration that this thing now that the human rights, and the European Convention about Human Rights, it doesn't apply to anybody in Russia anymore, and that's a sad thing, a very sad thing. So that's a victim of this conflict also. The Russians that lost one resort of last hope.
Yeah, and so I always see human rights as something like a miracle. So we came up with human rights after 1948 or 1945, of course, and it was a kind of response to the Holocaust. So of course, human rights existed already from the end of the 18th century, but it really became in existence after the Second World War as a response to this immense killing of millions of Jews, and of course not only Jews, but basically it is. So, and for me, human rights is not only rights. It's not only rights, but it's also about obligations. So human rights from Ukrainians or Russians create an obligation for me as a citizen in the western part of Europe. So if I'm thinking about the case of Mariupol, and you could say, well, is this a violation of human rights? Yes, of course. So people aren't seen as human anymore. So what kind of obligation would it create for us as part of this human European community, was basically built on this human rights, so to say, when it comes to protecting people in Ukraine? Protecting, well, it's the wrong word basically, but you know what I mean.
But there is we have the United Nations that actually give a right for foreign countries to get involved in a country if the government of that country is not capable of protecting the human rights of the peoples and so on. But then the problem with this United Nations is that they have veto right, these permanent members of the Security Council, and that means that it is a paralyzed organization. It will not do anything. And then we come to this thing that what can we do? And I don't know. It is for sure. This thing is that there is now a cry from Kiev that make a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and that would be technically, militarily easy to do. But there is some kind of risks involved with it, and that is what has prevented it from happening. On the other hand, it is, of course, I'm here now myself under the Ukrainian sky, that it's a little bit peculiar situation that it is violated, this sky, just now by one power. How can it escalate this war if somebody else stops this violation? To some extent, it seems so unreasonable. But this thing is that it is our president had in his New Year's speech, he also talked about this thing that how those who want to have peace are in fact on the mercy of the most brutal members of the society or civilizations. And it is like this, that we are a little bit we can't do on a national level what we should do. But then it comes this situation when we will do it anyway. And to some extent we can think about this thing now. that today it is then possible, not possible to put on a no-flight zone over Ukraine. But then we also know that if the Russians are going to do what they did in Grozny, in Aleppo, and start bombing, there are maybe 2 million people still living inside Kiev. If 100,000, 200,000 of those are killed when they are bombarding block by block like we used to do, we know that at some moment the international community with NATO and European Union so on will go into that conflict. And then we should ask ourselves that now it has died maybe, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 civilians in Ukraine. That's acceptable. For sure, 200,000 is not acceptable. Then we will do something. But where do we have our scale? How many kills? How many dead people we are going to accept to die before we are doing something? Even if you can see it, and that is a little bit that should be asked those who say that we can't do anything. That ask them that how much is a Ukrainian life worth for you? That for sure you are not accepted to let 1 million Ukrainians die, but you are accepted. You accept 10,000 to life. Why? What is your scale? How many Ukrainians have to die before we do something? And that could not us as individuals, but our governments should think about these things. But how many are we prepared? I mean, to be killed like people are killed in Kharkiv, in Mariupol. It is I mean, it's no bigger abuse of human rights than to kill a person and kill in this very harsh way. And it is appeared that Europe accept this killing to some extent, and it's a terrible question to ask this thing, that how many tens of thousands or how many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are we willing to let die before we do something?
It's of course. I had this kind of discussion with a friend of me on Facebook. He was part of the OCSV in the eastern part of Ukraine, and he had the same question. He was always in favor of dialogue and non-violence and so on. And he came up with this question, and basically he framed it the same way as you did. How many deaths are we ready to accept before we say, okay, this is enough? So I can tell you, my wife has solved already this question for. She said, okay, but this is already enough. So, but the real question is, the only answer is 0. We don't accept any one killed because of this brutal war, because this is the only way that we can not frame this as a kind of an utilitaristic way. So how many lives and then, but frame this as like say a human rights way. Everybody has the right to live. So this is not the question, but it is really a tough thing. So we can't avoid the question that we are now dealing with the logic, between brackets, of a nuclear state, the second state with nuclear bombs in the world, so to say. And it's very different from any other war we had in this last 80 years. So with Syria, that would be a problem. We didn't do a good job there, but that wouldn't have been a problem. Or with Saddam, to say, okay, poof. But here, these stakes are so immensely high that is, I think, a bit beyond our imagination to make these kind of decisions like that. And somehow they seem unavoidable, like you just said. How many are you? I very much agree with you that there will be a point in the future. I hope not, but there will be a point in the future that NATO or Europe or the United States, whatever, says, okay, but this is enough. We're going to stop this. No more bombs on Odessa. No more bombs on Mariupol. We're gonna know Aleppo in Kiev, so to say. But the question is really tough, because it could be, to put it a bit dramatic, an extinguishing of of mankind, so to say. Yeah? We could have nuclear bombs on Amsterdam, so to say.
Yes, but is this then to I mean, in North Korea they have their atom bomb. Shall we give them then that okay, if you don't bomb any else, take South Korea with Samsung and whatever you want. We want peace. We want peace. Nobody has that idea. And then with there are very many Pakistan, India's nuclear bombs, France, UK, America, Russia, most probably Israel also, and so on. We can't give up for each and every of them whatever demands they have, because we are afraid of the nuclear bomb. I mean, France, if they are really afraid of that, then if Putin would say that he wants the French Riviera, and remember we have a bomb, and then he would look at. Do you think he would look at it as a negotiation progress or win if he gives only half of the Riviera to Putin? Because otherwise I avoided the war. We can't do that because then we will lose everything that we have. And then you used a very good example, this thing that what happens if there comes an atom nuclear bomb over Netherlands. I don't think it will come because there Putin has his daughter living there. He will not let that happen. And Lavrov will not bomb London because it's only his stepdaughter, but I think his wife would become very, very angry and nasty if he let Putin bomb London. They have these restrictions, and there is some person in the room when such a decision would be made that would stop it. We just have to hope that it would go that way, because we cannot give up everything we have just for somebody making that threat.
So may I summarize it a bit like this: that you say, well, if you really if human rights really mean something in times of war, so that you have the obligation to protect human rights of everybody who is basically the possible victim of a war of aggression. What it's basically what this is, so to say. Then you have the obligation to protect these human lives as soon as you can, and with as less casualties as you can. That is basically, that would be the outcome. And don't play by this tactical Putin book, so to say, because he's basically playing with an argument and playing with a fear. And as long as you keep playing by this, instead of de-escalating, it escalates in Ukraine. But I'm not sure, pretty sure if you would have, if it would be you summarize it like this way. It was more or less my idea, how I look at this what's now unfolding in Ukraine.
No, but it's a little bit tragic anyway, the situation just now also. Then to some, it's not regarded to escalate the situation, to give this the weapons to Ukraine. And the weapons are, of course, defensive mostly. I mean, anti-tank weapon, it has a range of maybe 1 kilometer or something like that. So you are probably shooting at some tanks that is in your own country against your will. So that is defensive. And but to some extent, is to give this. I that is very strongly support this military help to Ukraine that they are giving. But then I have a little bit hard to understand this thing, that why is that okay, but not to stop this killing of people in this encircled towns. Why? What would that be? It would be just be. It would not escalate somehow. It would just to establish that the Ukrainian sky is no airplanes are allowed to carry any bombs there, and if they come, they will be shot down. And is that an escalation? And it is somehow like they have got it mentally somehow that would be a big escalation. Why is a bigger escalation than giving weapons that are destroying Russian tanks there now and shooting down Russian air flights and helicopters? That I don't see. While it could be this to put on a no-fly zone, it could be or it would be a measure that would save a lot of lives.
Thank you very much for being here, Michael, and for helping us out, because I think it was very interesting that what you shared with us and your experience with us. So I hope to definitely to meet you again.